Welcome to Voices of the Valley. The first season of Whitewater Valley Presbytery's podcast will explore the theme of justice. Today's episode features the Reverend Dr. Winterbourne Harrison-Jones of Witherspoon Presbyterian Church of Indianapolis.
Greetings from Witherspoon Presbyterian Church, the Amani campus here in Indianapolis. Welcome to the inaugural episode of the Voices of the Valley, the official podcast of the Whitewater Valley Presbytery.
We are so excited to have the Reverend Dr. Winterbourne Harrison-Jones as our very first guest on Voices of the Valley. Winterbourne is the pastor of the vibrant Witherspoon Presbyterian Church of Indianapolis. He and his congregation are making a significant impact in this community, and we are anxious to hear more about the ways in which God has called the two together for such a time as this. Pastor Harrison-Jones, we are so grateful to be with you today. Thank you.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you, Bo and Jenny.
Yeah. Well, Pastor, I thought we could start out with just hearing a little bit more of your story, maybe some of the formative experiences that have led you to this point, this location, this point in your life.
I am fifth generation minister of the gospel, and I was telling Jenny just a few minutes ago, last week I had a chance to do a podcast with my friend Chris Henry, the pastor of Second Presbyterian Church here in Indianapolis. And in that interview, I said to Chris that I never remember a time in my life when I did not want to serve the church. You know, no astronaut dreams, firefighter dreams, or police officer. I've always had this deep love for the life of the church. Not per se preaching, though. I do consider preaching to be not my strongest gift. My gifts are administration and vision and things of that nature. But even as a child, I played dress up in the attic, and my grandmother and my mother were teachers, and so we had learning materials left over in the attic. So I had a school and a church, and I used to preach my grandfather's old handwritten manuscripts to the stuffed animals.
Wow.
And they would not respond either. God was preparing me to be Presbyterian. I now know. The stuffed animals have something in common. But nonetheless, I am born and raised in D.C. from a wonderful home, raised by my mother and my grandmother in a wonderful community of teachers and mentors and father figures. My love for the life of the church, the role of the church as an epicenter, as a convener, as a resource, I've always wanted to do this. This has been my dream, and to be here now at Witherspoon is a God thing, I will say. After seminary in New York, I came to Indianapolis and on scholarship to the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. I was sitting in my office one day and I typed in faith and philanthropy, and I thought that would be the next thing I would want to study. A man by the name of William Enright popped up. Mm-hmm. I sent him an email. Next thing I knew, I was in Indianapolis. I had a home on the backside of St. Vincent. My first job was with Sue Ann Gilroy and Nancy Frick at the St. Vincent Foundation.
Is that right?
And my life has been transformed. I thought I was hiding in seminary. I took some adjunct classes here in Indianapolis at CTS. Met a man named Frank Thomas. Frank Thomas was over pulpit supply for a church named Witherspoon, and it's been 6 years now. So, that's a lot. Your question was a lot, so I went through a lot. But,
Thank you.
But faith, community, social justice, how we show up in the world, how we live out our faith in bold and creative ways, and how the church uniquely, I believe, is called by God to stand in the gap. Mm-hmm. But I've loved these last 6 years here at Witherspoon, and I look forward to many more.
Oh, I love that.
It's amazing. It's only been 6 years, and anyone that knows you and Witherspoon have seen that transformation. That's so exciting. Well, Winterbourne, as you know, the theme of our first season of Voices of the Valley is justice. Mm-hmm. And as Presbyterians, we understand the work of justice and social righteousness to be a primary aspect of our calling as followers of Christ, as you said. In addition to the Presbyterian tradition, Witherspoon is rooted in the Black church experience in the United States, which has often been at the forefront of the work of justice in society. Given this dual heritage, what does the work of justice look like for the ministry of Witherspoon now and into the future?
We just finished, I don't know when this will air, but the Presbyterian worship service, and at the end of worship service, we were celebrating the retirement of Alan Thames, and I brought up a quote by Dr. Calvin Butts, fittingly on All Saints Day. He just passed, actually, last year, I believe it was. Nonetheless, Dr. Butts has a quote that says that I think education and faith are the Tigris and Euphrates, the twin source of our redemption as a people, something like that. Mm-hmm. Well, for me, Christ and culture are those sort of the Tigris and the Euphrates. And who we are as people, uniquely as African Americans or Africans in America, mm-hmm. and then how our faith informs how we move through the world. For me, this is an embodied kind of concept. I teach at the School of Education at IUPUI, and in my courses on formation, I talk about three things: agency, a credo rather, embodiment and agency. A credo, that which I believe; embodiment, how do I live that which I believe; and agency, what do I do based on that which I profess to believe. Mm-hmm. So for me, a church with creed or credo, without an embodied faith, I don't know what that is. From my cultural framework, from my theological framework, from my history, and even here at Witherspoon, I would argue to some extent, to speak of justice and mercy and love and all those sort of things, and not to embody it, to show up in the world in creative and courageous ways, understanding the risk, both individually and institutionally, that one may draw toward themselves. But whatever one's profession is, whether it be justice or otherwise, you have to strive in some way, I would argue, to live that out, and what does that mean all the time? I am not sure, but for me, justice is embodying, living out the love ethic of Jesus Christ daily, mm-hmm. and that love ethic, as I understand it, is captured so beautifully in Matthew 25. And if we could in some way capture just that portion of Scripture, the world would be a better place, mm-hmm. and the church would be a more authentic institution, you see. And so even from my upbringing, I've always had big questions. And so I would ask myself, why is it that there's so much suffering in the world? Why is it that there are so many drugs in the community and churches on every corner? What is this frenzy, as Du Bois calls it in his book, The Souls of Black Folk, the frenzy of black worship that I won't say that does not see, but why is it that the frenzy stops at the benediction? And what about the homeless man on the corner? When I did my doctoral dissertation at Colgate Rochester Crozier Divinity School, my DMin, I did it entirely. It was called "I Made a Promise to Lazarus." It was sort of an exegetical exploration of rich man Dives and Lazarus. And I remember reading that scripture for the first time within the context of a sermon that was written but not preached by Dr. King. Had he returned to Ebenezer on Sunday and not been assassinated in Memphis on April the 4th, I believe it was April the 4th, the sermon he intended to preach was called "Why America May Go to Hell." Mm-hmm. And he makes this argument about, again, exegesis, about Dives and Lazarus, that the sin there was that, not that Dives was rich, but that Lazarus had become invisible to Dives. So for me, this idea of invisibility, mm-hmm. I think is a carnal sin, the carnal sin of the church. And I believe that the church, through our preaching, our teaching, our hymn singing, or whatever Christian formation, through those methods and means, ought to make our eyes more clear, to ask questions: who is my neighbor? To silence our own clamor, our own sort of rudderings, and to hear the cries and the laughter even of those who are often at our doorstep. to take notice. I'm pulling on my Thurman tradition now, to take notice of the algorithms of the human heart, and the songs, as Thurman would call it. But justice to show up in the world as Christ would have showed up, to speak with authority and love, to stand in the gap when there are bridges to be built, to not pray. I have a thing about prayer. Frederick Douglass said, "I prayed 40 years and got no answer." Well, actually, the quote says, "I prayed for 40 years on my knees and got no answer until I prayed with my feet." So justice for me, you could take the Amos text, what does God require, or my God, or whichever one it is, what does the Lord require? But it must be embodied. And then once it's embodied, agency then, in my sort of three-part thinking, is what do you do with that? Justice is not always on the picket lines. It's not always, if you feel called to political engagement, fine. But in whatever way or for whatever occasion, how might Christ show up in this situation? Whether it's the abuse of elders, whether it's police brutality towards African Americans, whether it's injustice at the border, whichever, whether it's a creative aging or leveraging access points for children in education or literacy. I mean, whatever it is, what does the gospel of Jesus Christ have to say about these things, and how might I, me in the personal sense, do something about it?
Yeah. You mentioned one of your gifts is visioning and offering people themes and concepts that can sort of help them think systematically about the work we're called to do as Christians. And one of those sort of frameworks is Kwanzaa. And the principle that is taking center stage at this point is Imani, which is the name of the campus in which we're sitting right now. Could you say a little bit more about this transition and what Imani means and how it embodies what you're trying to do and what the congregation is up to?
Oh, that was good. That was a good transition. That was good. The Nguzo Saba, which are the 7 Kwanzaa principles, are life principles for us here at Witherspoon. And again, for me, it's Christ in culture always. So they're not, they don't replace the Christian doctrine, but they are inspired by in many ways. Imani is the 7th principle of Kwanzaa, which means faith. And as Dr. Karinga defines faith within the Kwanzaa suite, if you will, it is a faith that empowers us to show up in the world boldly. So again, this idea of agency, not this sort of prayer and contemplation, monastic thing, which is also has value at times, but faith that compels me to connect with others, faith that compels me to reach out and to love, faith that pushes me beyond the silos of my own sense of individualism to understand our cosmic connection. So when Witherspoon began to sort of discern, long before the idea of St. Andrews ever came about, we asked ourselves bold questions. Who are we called to be? What is God calling us to do? Who are we now? Might there be some healing that must take place, some reconciliation that must take place? How do we mend broken relationships? How do we deal with sort of things internally that hinder us from being all that God has called us to be? And what does it mean to answer the question, who is my neighbor? So that kind of intrinsic work we've been doing for the last 5 or 6 years. And I'm so thankful that the members of Witherspoon really accepted this stranger. And I'm a stranger to Indianapolis, I'm a stranger to the denomination, I'm a stranger to many people. I mean, they have shoes in their congregation older than I am. I was 27 when I got here, 26. I'm 34 now. And so they were willing to take a chance. I was thinner. I had straight hair. Did you remember that, my straight hair phase? Yeah. I had a straight hair phase, and we began to sort of do this God thing together. As my colleague over at Light of the World would say, how kind of God to put us here together. And so Imani came to me really in a vision. Our hope is to return to the east side of Indianapolis, to pay homage to the congregation of Emmanuel Presbyterian Church. That would be our Sankofa campus. But we thought that we would ground this chapter of our history around doing ministry differently. And that faith would be our lens, and that culture would be an invitation to those of all backgrounds to say, this is the place you don't have to lay down who you are at the door. And to be uniquely African American, or to be African American, I think uniquely, positions us to sort of broaden even our own sometimes isolated understanding of what the diaspora is, what the village, or who belongs in the village. And so, and so we sort of live it. The symbols everywhere, and the iconography is throughout the building, and the Kwanzaa principles of self-determination and faith and creativity, and all the other ones within that. Those 7 days help guide our work. And again, they tie us to our African ancestry and hold us accountable, in the words of Paul, to that great cloud of witnesses whose blood, sweat, and tears and suffering have paved the way for us to be here today.
Thank you.
In the program that you had in your celebration of this place, you had Black Presbyterianism, but I've heard you say African American. How do we communicate that culture? How do you want that to be phrased?
I think it's tied to the usage. I tend to always give grace with intent. So, and I may not be the best one to ask that question too. There are some politics of phrasing and phrases to be used. I am an African in America, African American Presbyterianism, Black Presbyterianism. Depends on what I'm reading or how I am, inspired to write a thing or to respond to a thing. We use the words Black Presbyterianism because it paid homage to the piece by Gayrod Wilmore, the first history written on Black Presbyterians. And it's called Our Heritage and Hope, Black Presbyterianism, or the African American Presbyterian Experience. That's a mouthful. But either way, in all forms, it is to speak of and to lift up, to shine light on the marginalized experiences of non-whites and other marginalized communities in the global South or whatever context may be. But for us here at Witherspoon, it was very important for me, ironically not being Presbyterian, to lay us into a larger story. Because sometimes congregational life can become tribal. My tradition, my land, my story, my story is not your story.
Right.
Which is true. I mean, there's some validity there, but particularly that we are now a blended congregation. I said to myself, how do I build an ark large enough for this thing to sit in and to sort of deter this sort of tribal thing, us, them, east side, west side. Yeah. And the idea came to remind us, and remind would almost mean that we knew, some knew. It is also to teach again to a new generation that we come from this long storied tradition of resilience and liberation within this denomination that did not, and still in some ways does not know what to do with Black people. And so the mural and the language really pays homage to these people and personalities and the institutions and the schools and the leaders and the thinkers, the scholars and the scholarship who have grappled with their love of the Presbyterian tradition and their unique cultural calling to show up in the world in ways that the institution or the denomination may not always have known what to do with. And so we, in that way, stand in a 2 century old, more than 2 centuries, of Black leaders and thinkers and preachers and prophets and prophetesses who have been both Presbyterian and Black unapologetically, and who have bore witness to the gospel of Jesus Christ. And for us here at Witherspoon, it's important for us to know, as proud as we are of our history beginning in 1907, there are others who share our color and our experience who have been grappling with these same issues and sacrificing in bold ways and asking tough questions and being the bridge, not just talking and praying, being the bridge, being the bread of life, extending themselves as living water in this parched and hostile territory that we call the United States of America. I often call them the most times not the un-United States of America. And again, how does our faith in God, I had a friend of mine ask me once, what's the difference between, the way black folks see Jesus and white folks see Jesus? I said, well, to some, he may be the crucified Lord. I said, for others, he's our embodied Savior. James Cone makes that more clear in one of his last pieces called The Cross and the Lynching Tree. Dr. James Cone, Black Liberation Theology, co-writer of Black Liberation Theology with Gaylord Wilmore, a Presbyterian, who also wrote Black Theology and Black Radicalism, I think Wilmore wrote. But anyway, Cone says that black people's infatuation, this is a paraphrase, with the broken body of Jesus is that in his broken body, they likewise saw the mutilated bodies of black people, and they knew he was real. That's why, now this is sort of a harsh parallel. This is why, parallel to hymns like Lift High the Cross, you have black hymns that says, and he walks with me and he talks with me. There's sort of this closeness, the inbreaking, that Christ, he's my Christ. I actually have a picture in my office by Ted Jones called My Christ, this sort of personal thing. And in that way, black faith, it is a balm in Gilead. It is a water in a parched land. Because Christ shows up in our suffering. Billie Holiday does it better than I'm ever going to do in this interview. In her lyrics, "A Strange Fruit," the great gospel writer Nina Simone, who put the gospel to song, talked about it in Mississippi Goddamn. Faith. How does our faith, Imani? How does our faith, and uniquely in this day and time that we live in, what is the role of the church in this division of political tension? With redlining appearing again, and voting suppression, and abuse of children, and gun laws. So how does the gospel of Jesus Christ and our unique cultural experience inform how the gospel shows up in the world? Yeah, it's always Christ and culture for me. How they inform one another, inspire one another, challenge one another, chastise one another when appropriate.
You're listening to Voices of the Valley, a podcast of Whitewater Valley Presbytery.
The culture piece is interesting and evocative here, in that you're bringing up musicians like Nina Simone and Billie Holiday, and you're bringing up artists. You gave Witherspoon Presbyterian Church gave a wonderful gift of art to our honorably retired now executive presbyter Alan Thames. I follow you on Facebook. I see your love for clothing. There's so much art and culture that's blended together into your life, and I can see around this space we're in, there are so many visuals to stimulate the senses. Could you say a little bit more about the role of creativity in ministry and in your own life personally? Because
as anyone who has been in this building before, and today was the first time I walked through this building since the transformation. It's amazing to walk through because it is the cultural, the creativity, the crucifix in the sanctuary, the font. The art and creativity, you can feel, you just, that element of history and is there. It's present when you see.
I am glad, and for those listening, I did not pay Bo nor Jenny to say that. We are not exchanging checks or honorariums here. No. Let me say this. My double major in undergrad was art.
Oh, okay.
But even before sort of formal dabblings, my love for sacred space and how it teaches. The love of art in sacred space, how it teaches and informs. As a child, I won't say I was the only child. I did have an older brother who was 9 years older than me. So I oftentimes felt like the only child because he didn't want his pesky brother, around. So I would wander through the streets of D.C., literally. And it was a safer city then. I had a backpack with food. I knew how to get on the bus. But as early as 8, 9, and 10 years old, I would just wander through the Basilica of the Immaculate Conception that sits at the center of the campus of Catholic University. I would wander over to concerts at National Cathedral. That's when I first heard Jesse Norman, the great African-American soprano. I would go over to a National Presbyterian Church, talking about coming full circle, to see the symphony projects, the huge fountains out. So the power of sacred space to transcend, to invoke wonder, was not foreign to me. Even my grandfather's church, he pastored 39 years in D.C. Our sanctuary had large stained glass windows and a huge rose window of the creation story when God had black hands. It was the first time I saw blackness show up in the biblical text or biblical interpretation. Yeah. Coupled with stained glass windows and pipe organs and great hymns. But space. So for me, sacred space is space that invokes. It's space that inspires. It is never sterile walls and bound hymn books and creaky pews. That was never my. I remember the smell of pound cake, in the fellowship hall growing up. Putting together Easter baskets, Thanksgiving baskets for the homeless. Cleaning the sanctuary as children, after big celebrations. But the space was communal, but it taught. There were symbols and names, and it paid homage. All those things. And so. You brought up attire, even in what I wear, my robes, my vestments, everything has an opportunity to teach, to tell a story. I uniquely always clad myself in ancestral pieces. The njame, which is the symbol of our congregation, is here on my little shirt here. And all those things. Now that I have studied a bit more, I am actually thinking about writing my dissertation. I'm in the PhD program again at IUPUI School of Ed, where I've been introduced to critical race theory. And within critical race theory, there's a subset called counter storytelling. To tell a counter story. And within that subset of literature is something called counter spaces. So a counter story, you can imagine, is just that. It is a story counter to the master narrative, usually the white narrative, white historical perspective. Black spaces, cultural spaces, schools, barbershops. So for me, black sacred spaces are not just churches. There's something sacred about the barbershop. There's something sacred about the funeral home. There's something sacred about the chicken shack. Because it's communal. God is in it. The struggle and the joy. So for me, uniquely, black spaces have a almost divine responsibility to tell a counter story. Yeah. Particularly in this really odd space we're in now, which we've been in before as African Americans historically, where so much of the master story is being rewritten. You now have books that you can't buy in stores now. You have authors you can't read in schools. You have this attack on African American history and culture. So for me as a leader, it's like, where else are you going to teach this stuff? Where else can people show up and see the faces and the stories and find the book? It is almost now illegal to call slavery. So how do you gather as black folk and make that make sense with youth ministry and all of these sort of things? So the space teaches. We have a library here named after Rufus and Susie Myers, the parents of Pat Payne, who is the director of the IPS Racial Equity Office. She's a fourth generation daughter of this church. Wow. But when all this stuff began to happen in the nation, credo. She has credo. Anybody met Pat? Pat got credo. But her embodiment was, what does the church, how do we create space for children to learn? And so she developed a library, not exclusively composed of black authors, but uniquely to collect what are now rare copies.
What a wonderful idea.
There may now be illegal to find things like The Souls of Black Folk and Up from Slavery and The Miseducation of the Negro and things of that nature. But even visually, space teaches. And no different than the great stained glass windows in the Chapelle Chapel in Paris when I went. No different than the great Christian effigies in glass and stone. Cultural representations. Even that wonderful, I'm so glad, Jenny, you noticed that crucifix. St. Andrews.
It's absolutely beautiful.
St. Andrews had a gigantic cross there. And that's actually, you can't tell on this podcast, but that's the cross that the crucifix came off of when it hung in Witherspoon. We separated it and hung the crucifix on the cross here.
So for listeners, we're in the session room of Witherspoon, and Winterbourne is just pointed to a cross that's in the corner of this room.
Now bare. But even that story, I will butcher the name of the artist, but he was a member of Witherspoon. He made 3 of these. They were called Black Jesus. He toured them around during the Black Arts Movement. His name is slipping me now. Came to Indianapolis, wanted to donate them in the 60s, one of them, or if not all of them, that part of the story I don't know, to the museum here, and they would not accept black art at the time, so the story is told. And he gave it to Witherspoon. It's called Black Jesus. We don't know where the other two are.
Wow. But
that's what you see in the sanctuary. And so again, the connection between Christ and culture and space and images that spark conversation, that remind us again that we are part of a larger story, an ancestral journey, and to God be the glory that we can do it and create hospitality for all.
yeah.
Well, it is evident as you walk through these doors. And that feeling you get that it's like going to that friend of yours that has so many things around their home, and you know each item has a story, and that's the feeling that you get. So, Winterbourne, as leader of the sole Black PCUSA Church in Indiana, would you tell us how...
Talk about a mantle to carry. I never heard it said like that.
But it's the truth.
Okay, it is the truth.
Okay, so could you tell us how listeners can support and or participate in the ongoing ministry of Witherspoon Presbyterian Church?
Yeah, I am. When you said it like that, I guess we are now. Seoul, Indiana, and if it were not for our sister churches in Chicago, we would be the last in the synod. What I would say, certainly you could go online and support a ministry. We have outreach ministries, youth ministries, education ministries, make a donation, that kind of stuff. That's my PBS commercial. But more importantly, come alongside. When we show up in the world together, black, white, blue, green, straight, gay, transgender, whatever, that is the biggest, the greatest sermon. I'd rather see a sermon than hear one any day. I'd rather you show me than merely tell me the way is the poem. Or the great gospel song that sometimes the only God people will see is the God that lives in you and me. Coming alongside us in this work of justice building, of community building, of access, of advocacy, of a faith that can be tested. And whatever that means for you, whether you attend worship, whether you come to Bible study, whether you follow us online, whether you make a donation, whether you come to a book talk, and not to learn from, but that we may learn together and grow together. Not that I aim to be some sort of black spokesperson for all 400 years of black folk in the nation, but that sharing stories and sitting in rooms and looking into each other's souls and to and finding that common thread, that scarlet thread, as Dr. Gardner Taylor would call it, finding that line of commonality make us stronger. And for me, that's what's more important than a strong Witherspoon. Witherspoon would be as strong as the people take heed to the words spoken within and live them without. But the Church of Jesus Christ, the Presbyterian Church, the Baptist Church, the AME Church, whatever, the Church of Jesus Christ will only be as strong as the bridges we build from heart to heart, from sanctuary to sanctuary, from chest to chest, from breast to breast, around issues that matter to us all. To have those tough conversations. But Langston Hughes, the great Harlem Renaissance poet, has a poem, I Dream a World, where man no other man will scorn. I'm going to butcher the rest, so let me stop. But I think you can help us by us all possessing a higher vision than where we are right now. And again, political, educational, whatever. I mean, whatever your thing is, you may not ever see the world the way I do politically, but might there be something that we can come to the table around? Food access, crime, something. Or are we so hell-bent on our individualism that the Christ we serve has no value at all to the world we live in? But might your Jesus have something to say about the suffering I endure? And might mine, her arms be wide enough to receive you in? And this is really bad exegesis. This may be, as one of my teachers call it now, cornbread eisegesis at this point. But might, when John says in Revelation, I saw a new heaven and a new earth, what is that? Yeah. And can we envision that together? What does a community of love and void of indifference and shared storytelling and locking arm in arm together, what does it look like? I don't know. But I'm up for the challenge. Absolutely. To figure out what that may be.
Amen.
And I'm thankful to you and to Bo and to the Presbyterian Whitewater Valley who have tolerated this old Baptist within your ranks. And the friendships that I have acquired here, the wonderful people I've met, your dear husband, Pastor Highback, and the wonderful work that he did stewarding the beautiful people of Emmanuel Presbyterian Church. I want that to be, this ought not be edited out. But the reason why I want that to be known is that this work has already begun. Yeah. Even I have come alongside. As Paul said, I too have sat at the feet of Gamaliel. But there have been women and men of faith who have been building these bridges long before I arrived. And I am honored to have added this, whatever this ripple is that I can, to our continued work together in this community for the glory of God, our Savior. Yeah.
This truly is an exciting time for us and Witherspoon, and it really is. It's been these last few weeks of the transition over here. Yes, it is.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, it's been an absolute joy, Pastor Harrison-Jones.
Thank you.
And it seems like there's so many other questions that are probably swirling around both of our brains right now. Yes. So we'll have to do a part 2.
I would love to.
Well, we like to end each podcast by asking our guests from this point forward, what's giving you hope right now?
This podcast.
Thank you.
Yeah, this podcast. I told Chris the same thing last week. The greatest power I think the church has is convening power. To convene, as battered as the Christian church may be in many ways and imperfect, in need of its own reformation, it is still the primary institution that can cut through the clamor oftentimes of our toxic noise to create space in some way for reverence and conversation. So through this podcast, this platform, we are modeling for the world that we really can sit down and talk about stuff. In conversation, not just interview format, but and whether we agree or disagree, might there be something salvific that is shared that may inch us along to some more blessed future. That's what gives me hope. What gives me hope is the rooms I go in now, where the faces are more and more unfamiliar to me, but the language is the same. That gives me hope that this thing this thing called unity and community and beloved community, or however you want to shape it, it can be realized. This is, in the words of Dr. Charles Adams from the Harvard School of Theology, this is not pie in the skies we wait by and by. This is something sound on the ground to be found while we are still around. Like we can do something now. We can we can convene now and share resources now and build now and advocate now and speak now and pray now. If you have to do it like they did in Nehemiah, some built by day, others fought by night. At night, those that fought at night, they switched. But whatever way you need to do it, it can be done. That gives me hope that we really can do more than write articles and preach sermons and pray at the altar and go home and say, oh my God, Lord, come reign, may your kingdom reign. No, we can reign when we get up and show up and stay up and not give up. I'll add that to my sermon too.
There you go.
So that brings me hope. These gatherings, these opportunities to share, to be blessed by, to be informed by wonderful colleagues, to hear more about your stories and to be in community together, that what brings me hope. It lets me know that the division, that the current state of division in our world and in our nation has not killed every creative unction in our soul to yet strive again. And so this brings me hope.
May God give you continued hope and strength as you continue your path.
Thank you. Thank you. And to you as well, Bo.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And to you as well, Jenny.
Thank you so much, Winterbourne.
Thank you to our guests, the Reverend Dr. Winterbourne Harrison-Jones of Witherspoon Presbyterian Church, Indianapolis. We hope you will join us for our next episode featuring Pastors Sandy and Martine Garcia of Amistad Church in Fort Wayne. For our hosts, Reverend Bo Brown and Elder Jenny Hymack, and Presbytery support staff Dawn West, this is Craig Shaw. This has been Voices of the Valley.